Hey everyone, welcome back to Midnight Outcry. I'm sharing 10 real, horrifying tales about road journeys across Kentucky on today's episode. These tales will make you reconsider ever traveling to picturesque areas at night. Please think about subscribing before we start, and remember to like and share it with your friends. Tell me where you're watching. Many thanks to all of you. Let's get started now. Story 1. At the time, I was 22 years old. Without a set itinerary or even a plan, we were in the middle of a road journey from Atlanta to Chicago. With a cooler full of gas station goodies and a playlist we couldn't stop fighting over, my cousin Nash, our friend Hugo, and I were the only ones packed inside Nash's old Ford Ranger. We made the decision to stay off the interstates completely. That was the main concept. Travel the back roads, dine at establishments without websites, and spend the night in motels with ice makers that hardly functioned and plastic room keys. We wanted to see the strange places that no one talks about. Since about 8 in the morning, we have been driving. Nash noticed a faded green road sign for Wells Run, 12 miles off the path, somewhere north of Lexington. He suggested that we pick a neighborhood tavern with live music, have supper there, or do something unusual. He enjoyed taking diversions, particularly those that were not marked on a map. Hugo and I didn't argue since he was driving. The road altered as soon as we turned off. It quickly narrowed. There were 2 lanes that appeared to have been neglected for decades. Pavement cracking along the edges, grass growing through crevices. The lines were worn away nearly to the end. Although there were indications, they were no longer logical. Twisted metal, with warnings for things that most likely didn't exist, and letters that were partially missing. The trees also grew denser, leaning closer together, as if the road had been hacked through them rather than strategically placed. We began hugging curves without guardrails after dipping into a crest. Every few seconds, all I could see outside my window was a precipitous drop in trees that seemed to go on forever. In an old bait shop that appeared to have been engulfed by vines, we passed a rusting pickup balanced on concrete blocks. The sign's letters were all out of order, and the paint had peeled off in large strips. Nash jokingly mentioned delivery. The main reason I laughed was to avoid being the only one who didn't. The stillness grew thicker after that. The GPS froze at that point. Nash repeatedly tapped the screen, but it remained frozen. The little blue dot wasn't moving, but we were. Sitting there as if we had parked in a remote area. No service, no bars. After one spin, the compass gave up. Nash put the phone in the cup holder and said, "Screw it." We anticipated hitting a dead zone, which occurs on back roads. Not a huge deal. However, 10 minutes or so later, we came upon a rusted guardrail and a speed limit sign that appeared to have been side-pushed by a snowplow. Graffiti, the word grin, pouring black paint, and a row of crooked teeth were all on the sign. We passed it again 5 minutes later. Same location, same guardrail, same strange mouth on the sign. "Did we turn around at some point?" I said, leaning forward, and Nash shook his head. The wheel had not been touched by him. There were no options or forks. It was a straight shot. All it took was one lengthy drive to return to our starting point. I took a picture with my phone the 3rd time we passed it. The guardrail still has damage. The spray paint is still sloppy, and the small piece missing from the bottom of the sign is still there. It was the 3rd time. A 4th followed. Hugo woke up in the back seat at that point. He blinked a couple times, stretched, and peered out the window. "Didn't we already pass that thing?" he replied. We informed him. He believed that we were playing tricks on him and trying to influence his thoughts. Then he noticed the sign once more. His expression changed. Leaning forward and gazing out the window, he thought that perhaps, if he concentrated hard enough, the road would begin to make sense. After that, no one spoke. Nash reduced his speed. We turned off onto this small dirt turnout a few minutes later, which may have originally been a trailhead. There was a garbage can with no bottom, an old wooden bench that was missing a leg, and what appeared to be a vending machine but was covered in green and vine. We all left without explaining why. All you had to do was stand motionless for a moment, stretch, and breathe. I became aware of it at that point. Nearly obscured by the woods, this road was smaller than the one we had been on. Hard, steep, and narrow. It dropped just a bit wider than the truck. There were no signs or lighting to guide us. There was only a red caution sign on the opposite side of a rusty chain-link fence. Nash approached and flipped it. We all stopped there for a moment, staring at the sign as if it might change, which said, "No outlet. Do not enter after dark." The sky was already dark. I advised them to turn around and go back the way we had come. At least we knew the way, even if we had to see that sign 5 times. Hugo, however, shook his head. "It won't matter if we're stuck in a loop," he remarked. "The dirt trail might cut through and link to something else," he reasoned. Back to the highway, perhaps. Nash was already in the truck again, so even though I didn't like the notion, I got in. As soon as we set out on the gravel route, things quickly got worse than we had anticipated. I clenched my mouth at the sound of low branches dragging across the roof, deep potholes and sudden twists. The entire vehicle tilted as if it were about to roll when we had to maneuver around a fallen log. Just more dirt and forests, no turnoffs, no signage. And then the woods suddenly parted. We entered a depression and dipped. The basin was ideal, with high walls surrounding it. And in the middle was an old stone and wood building with no lights and dark windows. There was only a dirt ring surrounding it, as if people used to drive by it and quit caring, with no driveway, mailbox, or path. It appeared to be dead, but someone was outside, a man or something resembling a man in a long coat, standing motionless, facing us, and doing nothing. Nash pushed the window down, but Hugo leaned over and said, "Maybe he knows how to get out." I told him no, don't open the window halfway. "Hey," he yelled, "you all right? We're looking for Route 65. No response. The figure remained still, didn't even flinch. Nash then turned on the high beams. I realized something wasn't right when the figure was struck by the light. The face. It wasn't a face. It was painted, flat, and resembled the head of a mask rather than a person wearing one. Eyes were merely smears of black. There were 2 red lines in the mouth. The head inclined as if it were listening to something distant, but it didn't blink or open. Then it took a slow stride forward, followed by another. Just movement, no shuffling, no sound. I ordered Nash to retreat. He stopped asking questions now. He turned the wheel and put it in reverse. The figure came to a stop. Then all of a sudden it was nearer. Less space, as if someone had skipped the frame, but no movement. I yelled. Nash blew it away. We ran up the slope again. Only once did I glance back and see it standing, with its head still cocked at the top of the clearing. A jolt sent the mirror sideways as we struck the pavement once more. However, the location where we had previously pulled off was no longer there. There were only trees, no benches, no vending machines, and no signs. The road then split in 3 directions. No clues, no signals. They all had the same appearance. "Have we driven into a test range or something?" Hugo wondered. He was breathing heavily, as if he had just completed a mile of running. Nash remained silent, simply chose the median path. It fell quickly, then soared once more. After a while, we found ourselves back on a highway. Actual pavement, actual lines. Everything seemed to have weight again once a semi-truck went by us on the left. We were silent for a long time. We drove off and got out at the next petrol station. The truck side had 3 lengthy scratches that went right through the paint. The rear door caught something pale. I thought it was fabric, so I grabbed for it, but I froze as I touched it. It wasn't made of fabric, the material was paper. It's fragile and ancient, like the kind you'd peel off an abandoned house's bathroom wall. Something was sketched on it. 1 red line and 3 black circles, a mouth and eyes. I dropped it in the parking lot, instructed Nash not to handle it. From then on, we didn't communicate much. 3 weeks later, I received a link to a local blog from Hugo. Someone discussing a trail outside of Wells Run. We said that since the 1980s, it had been closed off. Libby drunk writer brought up a former ranger station that was never demolished. Claimed to have spotted a figure standing outside. The building was the same, but the picture was hazy. Furthermore, there were multiple figures. 2 of the 3 were wearing coats similar to the one we observed. It was taller, the third one. Story 2. I had loaded up my ancient Honda Civic with Eli, Joe, Danny, and myself for a weekend road trip. We were traveling up to Columbus, Ohio from southern Tennessee. The idea was to travel straight through late Thursday night and arrive by Friday morning. At the time, it seemed like a decent idea. When we arrived, we had more time to hang out, no motel fees, and less traffic. All of us were in college, broke and overconfident in our abilities to get by on energy drinks and snacks from vending machines. The first few hours went smoothly. Talking loudly, bickering over the playlist, and passing around a huge bag of cheesy popcorn that made the entire car smell like a high school locker room. We were all full of foolish travel excitement. At first, we stayed on the road, traveling through Nashville and Kentucky at a respectable pace. We hit construction somewhere just south of Louisville. Now it's a complete traffic nightmare, with only a few cones. Since nothing was moving, I took the next exit in the hopes of finding a different route that wouldn't need 3 hours of brake light watching. Using Google Maps, Eli discovered a back roadway that passed through several small towns to the northeast. In all honesty, the thought of driving a country road at night sounded pleasant, and it appeared to be peaceful and easy. Initially, it was a 2-lane road with very few cars and a lot of woodland and fields. Only the outlines of fields and the occasional farmhouse with a porch light on could be seen because the moon was out. We continued to laugh, to distribute snacks, and to converse. Nobody gave it a second thought. By midnight, however, something seemed strange. After more than an hour of driving on that road, it began to seem as though we were going nowhere. The indications didn't stack up. We went by one that read Hollis 5 miles, and another that read Hollis 4 miles would appear 20 minutes later. Although the car was driving well, we reasoned that it might just be gradual progress. I wasn't being creepy. To be sure, I looked at the speedometer several times. There were never any towns, only more trees and nothing. The radio began to malfunction at that point. Initially, there were a few hitches and a little static crackling in between songs. Songs would then resume as if someone had clicked rewind. One became stuck playing the same verse repeatedly in this strange 30-second loop. Then, in the middle of the chorus, it leaped ahead and continued as if nothing had occurred. After Joe quipped that we were in the Appalachian Twilight Zone, the laughter subsided. Something about the road felt off, and neither of us wanted to admit it. We noticed lights at around 1 in the morning. Just off the freeway was a restaurant, an old glass and chrome structure with a neon eat sign that flashed between red and white. Nestled among thick trees in a gravel lot, it appeared to be a throwback to the 1950s. It ought to have been a boon. We were hungry, exhausted, and beginning to feel anxious, so we parked. They appeared to be museum pieces, yet there were 5 or 6 cars parked outside, faded and dusty. Under the wipers on one, moss was growing. Another had leaves smeared on the glass rims. They didn't appear deserted. They appeared to have been confined there. It became more bizarre inside. It was completely illuminated. The booths were tidy. Each table had a cleanly laid out menu. Slowly, the ceiling fans rotated. At the counter, there were half-full coffee cups that appeared to have been abandoned after someone had taken a sip. Unfortunately, nobody was inside. No cook, no waiter, no patrons, just the stream of the fan above and the soft hum of the lights. Eli gestured toward the timepiece over the register. It is precisely 3:00. Not a moment went by. There was no movement in the hands. Pointing upward, the second hand was stuck. And it didn't tick once, no matter how long we watched it. We didn't discuss it. We simply strolled back to the vehicle. Until we were halfway down the highway once more, no one spoke. The farther we traveled, the stranger things became, and even then it was just Joe saying, "What the hell was that?" Around 1:30, we came upon an old Glory Tobacco billboard. It was disintegrating. Rust was seeping over the bottom, the paint was faded, and someone had sprayed red paint on one corner. We tried to dismiss it by making jokes about it. 10 minutes later, we spotted the identical billboard once more. It's the same one, not a comparable one. The precise graffiti, the rust, and the ripped corner are all the same. The road seemed to circle back without making a bend. The barn then arrived. The siding appeared to have been clawed by something enormous, and the roof was collapsed when we first passed it. 20 minutes later, the same barn, the same roof hole, and the same bent weather vane spinning idly were all there. None of us spoke when we viewed it for the third time. No longer did it feel like déjà vu. We had the impression that we were stuck in something that didn't want us to go. At a junction, we eventually stopped, in the hopes of resolving the situation. We had never heard of towns like Merrill Ridge, Kilton, and Westera, yet the signs directed us there. We looked at our phones, printed maps. There was no match. We were no longer even detectable by the GPS, a solitary blue speck amidst a sea of gray. Something crossed the far side of the road as we were debating whether to turn left or head back the way we had come. At first glance, it appeared to be a tall, slender human. But the way it stood, too straight, too motionless, was off. Its clothing was torn and dangling like damp linen. Its neck seemed to have buckled, as seen by the excessive sideways tilt of its head. I can't even recall making the decision. I simply grabbed the headlights and turned them on. The figure vanished in an instant. No movement, no sound. It simply vanished as if it had never existed. Without waiting for anyone to say anything, I pressed the gas. Time became weird after that. We had listened to at least 8 tracks, which felt like the majority of the CD, even though the dashboard clock indicated that just 10 minutes had gone by. The track counter indicated that we were still on song 2 when we checked. The car clock matched our phones. We had survived for 1 hour and 10 minutes. Eventually, perhaps about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, hard to say, we came upon a town that appeared authentic. Trucks parked at the pumps, real people and gas station lighting. One man smoked while leaning against the door and gave us a nod as if nothing strange had happened. Everything returned to normal as soon as we pulled in. Just pavement, birds, and the scent of diesel. No eerie buildings, no looping signs. Without a word, we filled up. 15 minutes, the cashier responded, raising an eyebrow when I asked how far we were from Lexington. A straight stroke. We've spent 5 hours behind the wheel. What should have been 60 or 70 miles took 5 hours. We couldn't all explain it. We kept on the interstate for the remainder of the journey. We kept with it, regardless of how awful the traffic got. We didn't even recommend a shortcut. I never drive at night without a full tank, and I haven't been on Kentucky country roads since. Narrative 3. When I was 20, 4 of us were traveling from Cleveland to Nashville in the hopes of cutting the journey time by a few hours by using some of Kentucky's back roads. Our plan was to simply drive through the night. We wouldn't stop or stay at a hotel unless we had to. Coffee, food, gas, and rotating drivers when someone began to nod off excessively. Don't complicate things. Arrive prior to the sunrise. That was the strategy. The initial hours passed without incident. The route was almost deserted by the time we entered Kentucky. The taillights of a few 18-wheelers are vanishing behind us as they hum along in the distance. We stopped someplace close to Reading Hollow, a town. It was so tiny that I doubt it had anything more than a diner and a post office. We found ourselves on a convoluted 2-lane road that wound through dense forests and undulating hills thanks to the GPS. It appeared to be the type of road where deer and possibly a few old barns would be expected, but there were none. No homes, no lights, no gas stations, no billboards, no indications of life. Only trees squeezing in from each side, and the odd wooden fence that seemed prone to collapsing in a strong wind. I rode shotgun. Marcus was behind the wheel. With their sweaters pulled over their faces, Jonah and Liv had both fainted. Jonah may have been wearing earbuds. Regarding Liv, I'm not sure. As if she had done this 100 times, she just curled up with her legs tucked under. The only sounds were the tires on the road, a steady low hum, and the occasional clatter from the trunk when we went too fast over a bump. I saw him after we had been on that stretch for perhaps 20 minutes. There was only a man standing a few feet back, near a drooping wooden fence, just past the ditch, on the road's edge rather than on the shoulder. He wasn't looking at us or waving. His arms were slack at his sides, like if he had wandered out there and forgotten what he was doing, and he was facing the other field. His clothing caught my attention right away. This loose, collarless blouse was worn with brown shoes that appeared to be completely saturated in muck and dark suspenders. The sort of attire you could find in an antique black and white photograph. As we went by, he remained motionless, didn't blink, and didn't even bat an eyelid at the headlights. Marcus continued to drive as if he had never noticed him. I looked at him and waited for a response. Nothing. At first, I remained silent. To be honest, I thought maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks, but I didn't want to come across as dramatic. At 11:00 on a Tuesday, a man was out in the middle of nowhere. Strange indeed, but not unfeasible. We were all so worn out. If you allow it, everything becomes a little weird at night. We made a gas stop at this dilapidated station 2 hours later, which appeared to have not been renovated since the 1970s. It's the kind of place you only stop at when your gas light comes on, with a faded sign, buzzing lights, a single functioning pump, and nothing else for miles. Marcus remained outdoors to refuel. In order to keep us awake, I went inside to get some drinks and something salty. One functioning vending machine, a dusty old magazine display, and a cashier who hardly looked up when I paid were all present. I leaned against the car when I returned outside and informed Marcus about the man I had seen. Before I could finish describing him, Marcus interrupted and repeated the same information: old shoes, suspenders, and a shirt. He was standing near the fence, arms down, as if he was anticipating something. Then he made a statement that really chilled me. He informed me that he had previously seen that man, but not recently. Like a year ago, someplace else on one of these same types of roads, on a completely different drive through Kentucky. He claimed that he had always assumed it was a delusion or simply being exhausted. He was looking at me now, though, as if he wanted me to convince him it was merely a coincidence. Since I had never traveled through this region of the state before, I was the only one who couldn't. I had no idea what the road we were on was called. If there was nothing more to it, how could we both see the same guy? After that, we weren't sure what to say, simply got back into the vehicle and drove on. We parked into a tiny rest area at around 3 in the morning. It's not that much. A solitary flickering light over the structure illuminated a lengthy row of vacant parking spaces, a vending area, and a few of restrooms. Jonah and Liv remained asleep. I went outside to take a potty break. With one hand still on the steering wheel, Marcus remained in the car and browsed through his phone. Like a haunted home, the restroom door creaked and was heavy. One of the fluorescent lights was humming overhead, and the interior smelled like bleach and mildew. I hurriedly finished, cleaned my hands, and went back outdoors to enjoy the chilly weather. That's when I saw him once again. Just before the trees started to grow, he stood at the far end of the parking lot. Like he had been standing there the entire time and none of us had noticed, he had the same worn shoes, the same suspenders, and the same eerie silence. He wasn't moving at all, let alone toward me. However, he appeared to be listening or waiting because of the tiny tilt of his head. It was more like the unadulterated shock you get when something doesn't fit with reality than it was actual dread. I remained silent. I just quietly walked back to the car and firmly closed the door without yelling. Without saying a word, Marcus turned on the engine. We didn't turn around. Didn't talk for a while. I simply drove. The automobile was tense. Even if the others were still unsure of the reason, it seemed as though nothing was in it and that we were all holding our breath. Jonah finally woke up and inquired as to why it seemed like we were going overboard and no one was chatting. I told him that I was simply exhausted. Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but he remained silent. Marcus abruptly applied the brakes so forcefully that the tires screeched as we were nearly past the last of the back roads. "Someone has just crossed the street," he said. I noticed him again as I leaned forward to look for movement, a glance, as if he knew exactly when to disappear, stepping off the shoulder and vanishing into the trees. Even when moving, the same eerie immobility, the same attire, and the same build. It didn't seem like a man was attempting to intimidate or flag us down. He seemed to be tracking us and waiting for us, and not in a surreal sense. In a very literal sense, I'm intentionally seeing you again. It wasn't until we came to the main highway signs that Marcus slowed down again. We were starving by the time the sun began to rise, turned into a little cafe. One of those places with scribbled signs in the window and mismatched chairs, right off the road near a town named Briar Ridge. Two elderly men were drinking coffee by the window and hardly paying any attention to us. We placed an order for bacon and pancakes. Marcus, still holding his fork like a weapon, sat across from me and stared out the window. I said, more out of habit than anything else, that I was going to the restroom. The corridor back there was small and painted a strange light yellow that gave the impression that everything was older than it actually was. Compared to the rest break, the bathroom door creaked considerably more. I noticed movement in the mirror as soon as I entered. For a brief while, I could clearly see him behind me, those terrible caked-up shoes, the baggy shirt, and the suspenders. He wasn't a trick of the light or a fuzz of reflection. There he stood. There was nobody in the doorway when I turned around. No noise, no indication that someone had been there. For a moment, I just stood there and stared at nothing. I then cleaned my hands and left as if nothing had happened. After a quick meal and a cash payment, we departed. No one inquired as to why. Now the sky was blue. The traffic was typical. The road seemed as it always does as the sun rises, but I couldn't help but notice the fields, margins, the ditches, and the fences. He was standing there, still watching, still waiting, and I almost expected to see him again. It was just before midday when we arrived in Nashville. Nothing else took place. However, I feel like I'm being watched every time I travel through Kentucky after dark because of that trip. Not in a paranoid sense, but rather in a persistent, calm way, as if someone were keeping tabs. Occasionally, I'll glance toward the roadside, hoping to spot a man in suspenders, motionless in the dark, far enough away to avoid detection. Story 4. For nearly a week, I had been cruising the back roads of Kentucky. I had a playlist that had begun to sound more like background noise than music, my beat-up old automobile, and no real plans. I had left my workplace in the middle of a meeting a few days prior. Something inside of me suddenly exploded when my manager reminded me that I needed to smile more. I shut down my laptop, got up, left the room, and never returned. Packed very little. I always forget to pack a few bags of clothes, a toothbrush, some snacks, and the charger until the last minute. I just got on the road heading east. Kept it a secret. I wasn't very concerned with where I ended up that day. I had been traveling since the early hours of the morning, perhaps 6 hours in, and had largely passed long, deserted fields and buildings that appeared to have been devoid of livestock for decades. There aren't many towns or cars. Even for rural roads, it was strange that I didn't see another car for what seemed like 30 minutes at one point. I stopped to get gas in the late afternoon. The location was just outside of Danwin, a small town. One of those names that, until you realize you've never seen it on a map, sounds kind of familiar. It appeared as though the gas station had not been renovated since the 1980s. There was a single pump, sun-bleach signs on the windows, and a half-burned-out open light that flickered. As it filled, I jumped out and began inspecting the tires. I saw him at that point. He appeared to have been standing just out of sight as he rounded the corner from the side of the building, perhaps in the mid-30s. It's difficult to tell. He appeared used up rather than filthy. He was dressed in pants that fell just below his ankles, drenched white sneakers that crumpled under his feet, and a flimsy windbreaker over a stretched-out green sweater. "Are you going east?" he inquired. His tone was calm, straightforward, and low, yet there was something in the manner he asked that suggested my response was very important. For a moment, I sort of froze. June was at a loss for words. He went on to say that he needed a ride to Mercer's Hollow and that he had $40. Said that it was past a quarry and perhaps 30 miles away. I was unaware of it. The town didn't sound real. He didn't say what was there when I inquired. He continued to gaze at the road as if he were trying to recall it from a dream. He seems harmless. In all honesty, it didn't seem like much. "Sure," I replied, and he got in. It was almost soothing for the first 20 minutes when we turned back onto Route 14. Just the sound of the tires and the road, with no music or conversation. I thought he could be sleeping, but when I looked over, I noticed that his eyes were wide open and fixed on the trees outside the window. I became aware that something wasn't quite right about the route at that point. The turns were more acute than I had recalled from before. The trees also took a closer look. Branches dangled low enough to occasionally brush the car's flanks. I continued to look at the mile markings. They weren't in order. Mile 38, followed by mile 32, and then mile 41. I looked at my phone. Service was still available, but the GPS was sluggish and nearly lagged. I questioned him about his confidence in our direction. "It always starts like this." That's all he said. Didn't give me a look or go into detail. "What did he mean?" I asked. "Nothing." His gaze remained fixed on the tree line as if he was waiting for something to emerge. Despite the radio being off, static began to seep into the speakers. When I attempted to turn it on, it then completely cut in. White noise only. Static. No voices. No stations. 5 minutes or so later, we came across a billboard. Huge empty background. There was nothing except a dark, washed-out sky and a stairway that seemed to have fallen apart in midair. No corporate name, no text, nothing. I saw him twitch as we passed it. He flinched slightly, as if he had seen something he didn't want to see again, but not enough to jump. I reduced my speed. His voice was not urgent as he turned to face me and whispered, "Don't stop, just keep driving." It had no fear. He sounded worn out, as if he had said it before and knew it would be inconsequential. We continued to drive. The road became narrower. There are no longer any signs or lane markers, just the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Then he abruptly instructed me to stop. To the right, there was a pause in the woods. Nearly buried is a short gravel lane. There was no mailbox or sign, just that trail disappearing into the woods, and the rusting gate at the front was hanging off its hinges. Without saying another word, he exited and stood on the shoulder, gazing into the trees. I inquired this Mercer's Hollow while I rolled down the window. No response as of yet. I became frigid when he simply said, "You need to leave now. Don't look back." Not only in terms of temperature. He phrased it in a way that gave me the impression that I had already done something that I couldn't take back. I inquired about his well-being. He didn't answer, simply continued gazing into the trees. Then more subdued, as if he were speaking to himself. I felt sick to my stomach when he continued. "You won't find it on any map. You only get there if you're already gone." I ought to have gone. I should have backed up all the way down the highway and put the car in reverse, but I chose not to. I took a seat. I'm not sure how long. Then I noticed something or someone emerge from behind a tree. It moved incorrectly, yet it was the same height and outfit as him. Like it simply imitated the shape, not understanding how walking functioned. It did not approach, like it had been waiting to be discovered. It simply stood there. And then one more came out, and another, the same one, the same dead stare, the same soap sneakers, the same windbreaker. They're all still observing. I didn't hold up on seeing what they would do. I nearly fishtailed into the ditch after slamming my foot on the accelerator and peeling off the shoulder. Didn't give a damn. Didn't give a damn about my destination. Failed to check the mirror. I simply drove quickly, holding on to the wheel as if it were my only anchor. I continued driving till I noticed lights coming from a dining sign that was illuminated by the trees. I killed the engine, pulled into the parking, and sat down. My hands continued to shake. The waitress inside inquired about my well-being. I inquired if she was familiar with Mercer's Hollow. She gave me a look that was both perplexed and unique, as if she was familiar with the name and disliked recalling it. I tried to describe the billboard, the gravel road, and the quarry, but she answered, "That's not around here. There isn't anything like that for at least 50 miles, she answered, shaking her head. I picked up my phone and went back to the car. No bars yet. My last known location was the gas station, according to the GPS. Then, for 2 hours, nothing. There is only a gap. No trail, no road. The diner was the next stop. There was a void, as if the car had jumped over time, with no history or path between. My charger was in the glove box when I opened it. I still had the $40 he gave me. The bills were mushy and soggy now, like if they had been taken from a flooded cellar, or worse. That night, I found a motel room just outside of Moorhead. There was only one bed and a buzzing ceiling light that wouldn't go out. The thin blankets had a stench of being cleaned too many times, without ever being truly clean. I didn't get any sleep. I believed I heard something outside the window every few minutes. There were no sounds or footsteps, only the impression that something was watching and standing motionless outside. I departed prior to sunrise. Never stopped until I entered West Virginia. I did not leave the interstate. No more shortcuts, no more back roads. I attempted to find Mercer's Hollow a few weeks later. Nothing. Not on outdated maps, not in any database, and not even on the strange conspiracy forums. Even the state tourism office was contacted. There had never been a town with that name in that region of Kentucky. The woman on the phone told me quite explicitly. Music. Story 5. For a week-long solo trip across Tennessee, I had borrowed my cousin Leo's clunky old automobile. It was just myself, an old paper map, and a lot of overanalyzing. I wasn't really sure where I was going. All I wanted to do was travel, avoid the interstates, and perhaps get some fresh air so I could figure out what in the world I was doing with my life. The vehicle was a drab blue '99 Camry with a sinking ceiling and a dishonest gas gauge, yet it moved when I commanded it to. I had to jiggle the key just right or it wouldn't catch, and every time I started it the fan belt screeched. However, it ran. That was sufficient. I planned my route across county highways, back roads, and twisting 2-lane roads that passed through tiny communities where residents continued to wave to oncoming vehicles. Driving through a postcard was how it felt. Just the road and the occasional diner buzzing in the window with a flashing open sign. No deadlines, no traffic. The first 3 days proceeded as one might anticipate. I made stops at locations like Maple Hollow and Dry Creek, ate grilled cheese sandwiches from broken plastic plates, and stayed at a motel where the beds groaned if you breathed close to them. The sort of places where the ice maker seems to be broken all the time. It was silent, even serene. The radio cycled among static and old country stations that faded in and out like ghosts as I drove with the windows down. The kind of journey that makes you smile years later. The silence, however, began to lose its allure by the 4th day. I can't even recall where I was. Somewhere between Marshall County and Oak Bend, just miles of forests and hills with nothing in sight. It had been at least an hour since I'd seen another car. There was no roadside shops, no cell service, and not even a broken mailbox to indicate that someone had ever lived there. The flat, colorless light that gives everything a little strange appearance was cast by the sun, which was somewhere past noon. I decided to stop and stretch when I noticed a small gravel pull-off close to a stand of trees because my back was hurting from hours of driving. The turnout was merely a piece of dirt and crushed gravel that was just barely big enough for the automobile and had no markings. After turning off the engine, I got out. The unexpected silence that enveloped them like a blanket. There was silence, no wind, no birds. I stretched till my back hurt while leaning against the hood. drank water from a bottle that had warmed up in the console. To get rid of the stiffness, I considered taking a short stroll among the forest. Then I noticed a man approaching me from along the street. I didn't give it much thought at first. Humans move. Perhaps he was seeking assistance when his car broke down. Perhaps he lived close by. However, as he approached, I became aware of certain discrepancies. He had no car behind him. There was no bike, no backpack, nothing. A lone man, strolling across the midst of nowhere. He wore sneakers without laces, dark pants that were too dusty to be new but too clean to be work clothes, and a faded green polo shirt with the collar half flipped up. He had his hands at his sides, swinging casually. I believe I noticed a bottle of beer in one of them and a knife in the other, and not a small one, kitchen-sized. It appeared to have come from a drawer rather than a tackle box. When I spotted it, he was around 40 feet away, too near for comfort, yet long enough for me to still get into the car. Trying to maintain a steady voice, I yelled out, "Are you all okay?" He didn't respond, simply continued to walk. Then he smiled and elevated the knife a little when he got to the edge of the pull-off. "I wasn't waiting for you," he said. I'm still troubled by the line. "You don't help me. Who are you?" or make any sense at all. It seemed as if I had interrupted something that was already in progress. I kept my tone light and forced a small laugh. "We ought to pour that into a cup, perhaps. There's no point in shattering glass here." He gave me a long look before gently nodding. "Yeah," he said. "Let's do that, please." He pointed to my car as if it were clear that we would both go there. Trying not to hurry, I turned and moved toward the driver's side. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps. Not heavy, but close. I arrived at the door, slid in, and opened it. Kept it open long enough to maintain peace. Then he leaned through the open window, his face level with mine. The knife was just centimeters away from my arm. "Glove box," he informed me. My stomach turned over when I heard, "You've got cups in there." I pretended to reach and nodded. I then twisted the key, stomped the gas, and slammed the lock button. The vehicle lurched forward, sending pebbles flying everywhere. I couldn't hear him properly, but he staggered back while swearing and possibly shouting something. I continued to drive. It was at least 5 minutes before I checked the mirrors. The road behind me was deserted, even when I did. Nothing, no automobile, no indication of him. I still had the unshakable suspicion that he would return. I drove till the road leveled out and became cracked asphalt for some reason. After a while, I noticed headlights coming from an old white pickup. I nearly started crying from relief. I pulled onto the shoulder, waved my arms, and flashed my lights. 2 men reached out the windows as the truck slowed. "Everything all right?" he questioned, and before I could respond, additional headlights came up behind me. Far too close behind me, a dirty automobile sped up and screeched to a stop. He was the one. The same face, the same clothes, and the same fucking knife. He yelled that I had something of his and that I was stealing his belongings. Perhaps his voice was slurred. I shouted at the truck's men. "He is that. The man with the knife is that one." They made no hesitation. The man's car was totally blocked when the driver threw the truck in gear and moved across the road. The man skidded backward after slamming on the brakes. After letting out an incomprehensible scream, he pushed his car into reverse and drove off down the road, scattering dust and debris. With my heart still pounding, I nodded and stayed close to their bumper as one of the guys in the vehicle reached out and shouted, "Follow us." After what seemed like an eternity of driving, we finally arrived at a petrol station at the outskirts of a location known as Rose Lake, which was maybe 20 minutes away. It appeared that the station had not been modified since 1985. A soda machine covered in duct tape, half the signage missing characters, and flickering yellow lights. The cashier gave me the phone inside. I dialed the sheriff. I had to repeat myself twice, since my voice was trembling so much. 20 minutes later, 2 deputies showed up. Both men are big and serious. The truck drivers, and even the cashier, who continued to chew gum and nod as if he had witnessed worse, were asked to make statements. He claimed that the elder deputy became very quiet when I explained the man, the clothes, the knife, and the strange line. They had received reports, he said. Out in those woods, a squatter, no stable address, constantly on the move, innocent at times, but not always. He had been observed requesting food, attempting to catch a ride, waving down automobiles, and occasionally worse. After a moment of averting his gaze when I asked him what worse meant, he answered, "You're lucky you drove off. Not everyone does." After that, I asked no more questions. I accepted their offer to be escorted to a motel close to the freeway. I didn't get much sleep that night. The stench of stale coffee and old bleach filled the room. With my keys in my hand and my eyes fixed on the door, I laid there completely clothed. My skin crawled at every tiny creak from the hallway. I packed things and departed after waiting till the sky outside turned gray. Without even bothering to have breakfast, simply got into the vehicle and drove away. Musics. Story 6. I was finally taking my closest friend Lacey on the road trip we had been discussing since high school. Just the two of us for a week. No obligations, no true plan. Simply following the route wherever it led. We did the best we could because we didn't have a lot of money. We subsisted on off-brand energy drinks, inexpensive burgers, and whatever munchies we could find at gas stations. We would either search for free campgrounds or crash in the car at night. We were indifferent. We had freedom. To be honest, using our backpacks as pillows while we slept in the rear seat felt like a natural part of the experience. The first several days were fantastic. Parts of Ohio were traversed, followed by a drop into West Virginia and ultimately Kentucky. It seemed like a new discovery at every turn. Signs for roadside attractions that had obviously been abandoned for years, old bridges, and a motel that had been neglected. It was flawless. We had become accustomed to using backroads by the third night. The highways were dull. Even though the GPS occasionally freaked out, we enjoyed navigating through such small areas that were just bordered by fences and trees. The map app didn't even display some of the roads correctly. They had no names, just thin gray lines. However, we were explorers, correct? We were in the middle of Kentucky that night. If there was a town at all, I couldn't tell you its name. The trees on either side had gotten closer together, as if the road were getting smaller, and the asphalt roads were becoming rougher, cracked, and patched in spots. It was really gloomy. No lighting from a nearby town, no porch lights, no street lights, nothing. Only our headlights pierced a pitch-black tunnel. Perhaps 20 to 30 feet forward, the beam reached. It was nothing but emptiness after that. An hour or so ago, Lacey had fallen asleep. Wrapped in her flannel blanket, she was snuggled up in the passenger seat, breathing deeply and slowly. We weren't far from the next town, but I was exhausted too. I told myself that, anyway. I continued to monitor the road while drinking a flat Pepsi and trying not to blink too much. It was too quiet without her awake, so I recall turning up the music, but everything sounded small and far away. Then I noticed a car being towed off on the shoulder up ahead, perhaps a few hundred feet away. I initially assumed it was just someone having a breakdown. I knew something was wrong as I drew nearer, but it happened all the time. The doors of all four automobiles were ajar, not just slightly. They were purposefully open, as if someone had ripped them open in a hurry and left without shutting any of them. It was an antique sedan, either gray or pastel blue. From the look of it, it's late. Although it was somewhat damaged, nobody was waving us down, no warning lights were on, and no phone light flashed. Like a dead animal with its limbs SPLED by the side of the road, it simply sat there with its doors open. I reduced my speed a bit. I suppose it was instinct. A part of you wants to check on someone when you see anything like that. However, the closer I went, the more strange it felt. Nothing moved. No indication that anyone was in the area. Furthermore, it didn't seem random how the doors were open. Everything seemed staged, as if everything had been done deliberately. Without pausing, I went by it. Didn't even check the rearview mirror. I simply tightened my hold on the wheel and maintained a straight line of sight. After 10 or so minutes, Lacey stirred. She asked how long we had been traveling, stretched, and blinked at the road. I explained the car to her. At first, she kind of laughed it off, assuming I was just exhausted and frightened. She became silent, though, when she saw I wasn't sharing her laughter. After that, she promised to take over for a while. I refrained from arguing. At a small gravel pull-off beside a row of overgrown plants, we made the switch. It was the first place broad enough to pull over, although it wasn't particularly picturesque. Outside, the air was calm and strangely warm. No bugs, no wind, nothing. We quickly switched seats and resumed our journey. I leaned back to try to get comfortable as she started driving, but she remained silent as we drove out. Didn't play any music. Didn't joke around the way she usually does. Her hands were gripping the driving wheel more tightly than usual when I turned to look at her. Then she added, "That car, it's behind us." I sat up quickly and turned in my seat, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. Indeed, headlights had emerged far back on the road. Slowly, 2 white dots approach. It wouldn't be strange in and of itself, but something about their movements would be. It was incorrect. My stomach fell when the car passed in front of our rearview mirror, and the figure began to take shape. The car was the same, a pale blue sedan with its doors still ajar. All 4 remained open and in motion. I was unable to comprehend it. What was the driving experience like? That kind of door should have been crashing shut or fluttering in the wind, yet it wasn't moving at all. They seemed to be stuck in place, keeping steadfast. It was only when she slammed on the gas that I realized I had begun to utter Lacey's name. Speedometer readings increased by 60, 70, and 80. However, the car continued to follow us, staying at the same distance without moving forward or backward. Tires roaring on the turns, we were speeding down that road, and it never stopped. I yelled for us to turn if we saw anything as we came to a bend in the road. Anything at all will shake it. A narrow road branched out to the right up ahead, just trees and gravel, no markers or signage. Suddenly, she turned. The car followed smoothly, as if it had anticipated our direction, even as the back wheels churned up a cloud of dust. Then, through the rear glass, I could clearly see it. No one was operating the vehicle, just an empty driver's seat with no form or shadow. Nothing. I began yelling at her to hurry up and saying things that probably had nothing to do with getting us out of there. She exerted all of her force on the automobile. 85, possibly higher. The tires shook on the pavement as if they were about to break loose. But whatever happened, that object stayed out of reach. Just the same, as if it were affixed to us and not pursuing us. The headlights abruptly stopped blinking. Lost. Simply gone. Not turned, not faded, simply vanished. Darkness was all that was visible behind us. Lacey continued to drive. I didn't either. It didn't appear around the next turn, so we just sat there, breathing heavily and hardly blinking. After a while, the road opened up and distant lights came on. A tiny village with actual buildings, signage, and streetlights. At the first petrol station we stopped in, we observed a bright, unsightly object with sticky floors and flickering lights. However, there was a sense of salvation. She turned off the engine and parked directly beneath the brightest light. For a while, we sat there, didn't say anything, remained motionless, simply looked forward, hoping to feel normal once more. When we did speak, it was only to agree that trips were over. We had no intention of discovering what that was. We also had no intention of staying to see if it occurred again. We had a direct drive home the following morning. Didn't choose the picturesque path. Skipped the lunch break. All we did was drive. That automobile was never seen again. Story 7. Shauna requested me to take his old F-150 down from our hometown in Indiana as he recently moved to Murfreesboro. He hadn't had time to transport the truck personally because his new job had started quickly. Since I didn't have a job at the time, I reasoned that it would be a good opportunity to go out of town for a few days while still getting petrol and money for free. In any case, I've always liked traveling alone. The rhythm of the drive has a pleasant quality. The road, you, and perhaps some music or a podcast to prevent your mind from collapsing in on itself. On a Tuesday, I departed shortly after dawn. The weather was chilly in late October. The kind when you need a hoodie in the morning, but regret it by midday. I felt pretty good about the whole thing, packed little, and threw a cooler with a lunch and some water in the back seat before heading out on the highway. The initial hours passed without incident. Moderate speed, open road, and little traffic. I let the wind blow some of the stale air out of the cab, rolled down the windows, and drove across southern Indiana at a respectable pace. The GPS provided me with several travel possibilities after I entered Kentucky. The route it recommended wasn't the typical route through Bowling Green and Louisville. Rather, it provided a different path, a two-lane state highway that wound through the back roads and hills. I would still wind up on I-24 close to the Tennessee border, it stated, even though it would cut me off for almost an hour. Why not, I reasoned. I have previously taken shortcuts. I wasn't in a hurry, and they're typically serene and picturesque. The drive ended normally at that exit onto Route 83. At first, it felt like more swirl, not bad. After a few miles, the road became narrow and had deep ditches on both sides and grassy shoulders instead of guardrails. The trees were dense and tall. In some spots, the sun hardly touched the pavement. Nothing out of the ordinary yet. However, the route began to feel more and more forgotten as I continued on. I had to keep both hands on the wheel to keep it steady since the pavement split and cracked in large seams. I was the only automobile to pass. No one turned around. 20 minutes later, I became aware of an oddity. My next turn was 30 miles away, according to the GPS for some time, too much time. Every few minutes, it repeated those 30 miles, but the number remained same. I looked at my phone. The route and distance were still displayed. Something about it annoyed me, but I chalked it up to a bug. A few minutes later, I took another look at the dashboard clock. Time went by, but the road did not. There was nothing but woodland, shoulderless roads, and that sane, creeping sensation of senescence that stretched on forever. No signs, no driveways, not even utility poles. I eventually came upon a petrol station. More accurately, I stumbled upon it. There was only a small concrete building, a single rusted pump outside, and a solitary flickering light beneath a crooked awning, not even a sign. Mostly out of habit, I pulled in. Even though the tank wasn't yet empty, I felt as though I needed a reset, a reprieve from the strange cycle the drive had devolved into. It was an ancient pump, the type that requires you to pull the lever and wait for a mechanical click before it starts. But it did the trick. After filling up, I went inside. The station's air was stale and had a subtle smell of canned beans and engine oil. There were just various brands of soup, crackers, and motor oil on the dusty, sparsely stocked shelves. I went to the counter after grabbing a snack and a bottle of water. That's when I noticed the tall, pallid, skeletal man behind the register. His cheeks appeared hollow as if he hadn't slept in a week, and his eyes were buried deep in his face. He simply stared as if he were observing a slow leak spread across the floor without saying hello or grinning. My belongings are on the counter. He tapped a few buttons and silently scanned them. Then he stared directly at me before the total appeared. His voice was quiet, as if he were hardly speaking out loud. On that road, don't stop for anyone. That was it. No emphasis, no context. He spoke as if he were reading the weather report. Uncertain if I had heard him correctly, I blinked. I tried to lighten the mood with a feeble laugh, but he didn't even bat an eye. Gave me my change without saying anything else. Pretending not to be alarmed, I hurried out. His remarks, however, continued to replay in my mind back in the truck. Never pause for anyone. After 10 minutes or so, that counsel became applicable. Behind me, I saw headlights. Too near, sharp, and bright. They seemed to appear out of nowhere. I was alone for a moment. The following time, I had a high-beaming maniac attached to my bumper, tailing me. The automobile simply remained there, but I was expecting a horn or a flash to go by. No sound, no movement. Just to let you know, I gave the brakes a little tap. There was no flickering of the lights. I let them go by pulling onto the shoulder. I halted, and their lights went out. Lost. I looked in the mirror, just a gloomy path. I then turned to face the clock. Not by a minute, not by 5, but by an hour, it had leapt ahead. Maybe 30 seconds had passed since I was halted. I waited for the numbers to correct while I gazed at them. They didn't. My phone matched the time. The engine continued to idle. Even though I couldn't describe it, everything felt normal. In an attempt to get rid of the crawling feeling that had taken hold of my neck, I resumed, driving at a faster pace. The road didn't get any better. Every mile seemed to stretch into two, if anything. The curves were too abrupt and then too slow. The trees appeared to be closer than previously. Then I saw the 42-mile marker. After seeing it once, I saw it again a short while after. Same location, same number. I saw it go by a third time. I started acting like this was all in my head at that point. There was a problem. Totally incorrect. I tightened my hold on the wheel. I saw him at that point. A man facing the woods, arms at his sides, standing just off the white line, motionless. I walked up to him, but he did not respond. Stood there like a statue that someone had forgotten to take down, without turning or waving. To avoid him, I swerved wide, and I watched as his head slowly turned to face me in the mirror. He moved as if he had all the time in the world, yet I never saw his face clearly. When I struck a section of pavement, the entire truck shook. However, the road was smooth when I looked down. The snarl followed, animal-like, low, and ragged, but not from the outside. It was directly behind me in the cab. I turned around. There is nothing there. I tried to block it out by turning on the radio, but all I heard was white noise. I then shut it off while it was buried in the static, a whisper repeating, not words I knew, but rhythm, relentless, like a chant directed directly at me. The noise was overpowered by the subsequent silence. Then, swam. The entire truck shook. There was still nothing in the bed when I looked in the mirror. Then, there was a heavier thud, as if something enormous had fallen in. I blew it away. Didn't give a damn about my speed. Curves and speed limits didn't matter to them. The beating went on. It seemed as though something living was moving in time with the road, as each thump matched the bounce of the tires. It then came to a halt. There was silence. Too silent. I had no faith in it. The passenger lock snapped up a second later, proving that I was correct not to. Mechanical and sharp, I gazed at it. Like fingers testing the doorknob twitched twice. The tires squealed as I sped down the hill, nearly losing control but managing to keep the truck straight as I swerved off at the next exit. The lock came down on its own as soon as I turned onto the new road. Once more, the mile marks began to count up, typical numbers in the proper sequence. The number of trees decreased. The streetlights came back on. At a motel outside of Nashville, I pulled off. I sat on the bed with the keys still in my hand and shut the door without even checking the room. The following morning, I gave Sean the truck. It drove well, I told him. I never looked back after purchasing a plane ticket home. Story 8. We had been traveling across Kentucky for a week during the summer, just following routes and seeing what happened, with no particular plans to get anyplace. This type of travel has no set schedule, simply a cheap lodging, a petrol station, munchies, and any odd locations the map indicates. Russ, my uncle, was driving. He cherished such things, claimed that everyone forgot about America's greatest features. Sherry, Russ's then-girlfriend, was riding up front, while my cousin Jared was riding in the rear with me. This was Russ's rule. No freeways, not at all. He would make a great effort to stay off an on-ramp. Everything was flattened by those interstates. Created a McDonald's and a Shell station, transforming the entire nation into a single exit sign. He desired the genuine forgotten things. By that time, we were well into the back roads. Deep, I mean, strange county roads and winding state highways that weren't always visible on the GPS. We would occasionally go 30 minutes without seeing another vehicle. We were enjoying it as well. At the very least, Jared and I found it amusing. At that age, everything seemed like an adventure. We departed a location known as Pelham Ferry that morning. There was only this wall with a slot cut into it, and the motel had no front desk at all. And a man's hand came through and gave Russ a key when he knocked. No face, no words. Sherry had joked that it was either the most efficient or the creepiest check-in she had ever done. We had chuckled. When I think back on it, it seems like everything started to go a little wrong at that point. We had breakfast at this country eatery about an hour after we left town. It was a traditional old establishment with red booths and a jukebox that didn't seem to be in working order since Reagan. Russ engaged the waitress in a lengthy, meandering discussion on picturesque routes while we were dining. She brought up this route that meandered down through an area where they used to mine, close to an old quarry. She referred to it as real different, simply grinned as if it were an inside joke without explaining what that meant. When Russ thought he was going to discover something that no one else knew about, he always got that face. The next thing I know, he's taking us in a completely different route and folding the map up like it's a treasure map. Sherry arched her brows but remained silent. They had a sort of dynamic like that. He strayed, she made her way. After an hour, we felt as though we had traveled to another planet. No vehicles in either direction. The road was crowded with trees that appeared to be attempting to retake it. The pavement was uneven and fractured. Whole pieces had been sucked up by grass and soil in several spots. The homes we went by didn't appear to be inhabited. You might question when someone last checked their mail when you observe a mailbox slanting at an odd angle or a damaged porch swing. In one location, a dilapidated school bus had slipped into a gulf and remained there. By that time, we had hardly spoken. The truck had this strange silence, heavy but not tense. Sherry had even ceased calling attention to things. "Wait, what's that sign?" she whispered abruptly as she leaned forward. It was just ahead, protruding from the tall weeds as if it had been purposefully placed there. New-looking, bright green, and far too pristine for the rest of the road. 4 miles to Beller Hollow, Jared scowled. "I am aware of that." Russ looked over his shoulder. "What have you heard of?" Then Jared said, "Beller Hollow. The town that fell apart, isn't that right? Has it collapsed?" "Yes. There was a legend, or perhaps a story, about a mining town that collapsed. As if the entire thing collapsed." Sherry looked at him as she turned around. "It's not true." Jared gave a shrug. "It's still strange. The sign appears to be spanking new. We saw them at that point. People are walking slowly around a bend in the road just ahead." They were in a long line, single file, stretching along both shoulders of the road like some kind of parade, but they were all silent, without music or conversation, and there were perhaps 20 or 30 of them. Russ slowed the truck down considerably. I recall thinking he didn't mean to do that at all. His foot seemed to have abruptly quit applying the gas. This tall, gray-coated man with a long, curved stick at the top was the first person we saw. Next, a woman wearing a faded dress touched the floor. Subsequently, a group of 3 or 4 children wore nearly identical outfits. A full-sized camel was then seen strolling directly on the shoulder of a dilapidated country road in Kentucky. Its fur was spotty and sparse, as if it hadn't eaten or sheltered in months, and its hump drooped like a deflated balloon. More people followed, including several more kids, older guys with bulky bags, and a woman with a wrapped package. Nobody was speaking. Nobody even gave us a glance. They simply moved at a steady pace, eyes front. "Should we see if they need help?" Sherry murmured softly as Russ drove up to the side of the road, but nobody moved. Russ walked out the door after opening it. Without giving it any thought, I followed. I had this sensation in my chest. Not precisely terror, but a tense, icy feeling that makes you wait for something to go wrong while watching a daredevil show. Despite not looking at us, the tall man with the stick stopped, remained motionless, and gazed straight ahead. The woman behind him then moved a few feet closer, out of line. She made a statement. Perhaps it sounded like English, but not quite. Sluggish and stretched out, as if the pitch had been altered or she were submerged. Calling from the truck was Sherry. Russ asked if they needed water. "Down here, is there a town? What lies ahead?" The woman remained silent. All she did was hold up her hand and gesture farther down the street. There was a deep, unnatural, grinding grunt from the camel behind her. It had a metallic sound, like a piece of equipment breaking in two. Something dropped in my gut. The children suddenly turned to face us. Same head angle, same motion. Their faces remained unchanged. They were not angry, they simply gazed. Just observing, not afraid. Russ's words were plain and concise at that point. We didn't argue back in the truck. The windows immediately fogged as the door closed, as if someone inside the cab had breathed. I wiped my sleeve across the glass and peered out. There was nobody on the road, just trees and broken pavement, no camels, no footsteps, no people. Russ remained silent. He made a sharp U-turn with the wheel, scraping the shoulder and sent it back the direction we had come. I've never heard anything as loud as the stillness in the truck. We passed the same diner where we had breakfast 15 minutes later. It looked entirely different today. The sign has vanished. There are no automobiles in the lot. There were no lights on. As if to keep something in, the windows were boarded from the inside. Not even slowing down did Russ. He wasn't asked to. Until we came to a legitimate state road, we continued to drive. There is real traffic, 4 lanes and flashing signage. We pulled over at the next petrol station. Russ asked the clerk inside if he had heard of Bellora Hollow before. After a moment of hesitation, the man responded, "Not in a long time." "Was there a town out there?" asked Russ. The man gave a slow nod. "That was in the 1970s. The entire location collapsed. Mine collapsed. No survivors." He hesitated as though he wasn't sure if he should continue. "That road don't go anywhere no more," he continued. "After that, we didn't really communicate. Not about how it ended, not about what we'd seen." For the remainder of the journey, Russ adhered to the highways. No more side trips. Don't talk to waitresses anymore. That path was never located again. Narrative 9. Lena and Marcus, 2 of my best friends, persuaded me that we could avoid paying for a motel. After a concert in Nashville, we decided to get some snacks and a music for the journey because we were young and alert. It was an easy strategy. Stay hydrated, switch up the drivers, and return to Ohio by sunrise. Initially, it seemed like the ideal conclusion to a pleasant journey. For a time, it was all positive thoughts and highway stretches as the city lights went out behind us and the roads opened up. We tried to guess how many billboards we would pass before the next town, sung along to whatever was on shuffle, and joked over stupid stuff. However, as we entered Kentucky, things began to feel different. It's difficult to describe how deserted some of those back roads become. There won't be anything to see for miles while driving. No cars, no houses, not even a porch light in the distance. A never-ending road with dark trees encroaching on either side. We didn't notice at first. Not at all. After a while, the night began to settle in, but we were still swept up in its energy. Occasionally, one of us would look at the time. Every time, it was later than we had anticipated. The dashboard would indicate that it had been almost an hour since the last check, but we would insist that it had only been 20 minutes. I began to have the impression that the road was extending beneath us at one point, gaining distance while we were not looking. We discovered this small gas station right off the highway at around midnight. It was sitting by itself at the edge of a road bend. There was a flickering overhead light that kept buzzing like a mosquito caught in a lamp, and an ancient pump with a rubber handle that appeared to have been in use since the 1980s. Marcus continued to browse his phone while he was in the car. To pump, I went outside. Lena went to get some food inside. She took a while to come out. She appeared quite strange when she eventually went back outdoors. Off, yet not frightened. As if she didn't know why she had scooped him up, she held a small bag of pretzels and a Coke. Remained silent until we resumed our journey. Then she said, in a very hushed voice, that the man behind the counter had said nothing. Not even a nod. All he did was stare off into space behind her shoulder. Didn't respond when she expressed gratitude. Didn't flinch. As if it were automatic, I simply called her and gave her the change. At first, we made jokes about it. Marcus joked that ghosts were employed at night. None of us opened the snack she purchased, but I made a stupid comment about animatronic cashiers. After around 20 minutes, I saw headlights in the rearview mirror. They were far away, almost discernible through the highway's dips, but they were always there. I initially thought it might have been a late-night trucker or another driver, but as we continued, I became aware of an oddity. Never did the headlights approach. Whether I sped up or slowed down made no difference. They maintained their distance. Not enough to disappear, too far away to pass. I identified it. Leaning forward, Marcus attempted to gain a better view. He shrugged and squinted. He suggested that they might be pacing us. Still silent, Lena then remarked, "It doesn't feel like that." She didn't describe the sensation. She simply gazed out the window while crossing her arms. About an hour later, the lights were still there when we stopped to change drivers. No more, no less. Marcus took over the wheel right there, and that's when the GPS began to malfunction. It froze first. Then, all of a sudden, we were 10 miles ahead. Subsequently, it began rerouting us to unfamiliar roads. Roads that weren't even on the actual map Marcus had in the glove box. It recommended turnarounds in areas without junctions and instructed us to take exits that weren't there. It attempted to lead us at one point onto a small gravel route that went directly into a dense forest wall. "Turn left," the voice repeated repeatedly. "Make a left turn. Go to the left." Flat voice. Just this lifeless cycle, no urgency. Lena reached over and flipped off the phone entirely, didn't pause at all. She only murmured, "It's not helping." For the remainder of the journey, we didn't use GPS after that. The route itself then began to change. The markings on the pavement, which were hardly discernible in the headlights, appeared to have been worn away with time. The traffic signs also began to appear odd. Names we had never heard of in faded green. Tiny communities that were not depicted on the map. The letters showed a slight crookedness, as if they had been hurriedly posted without being corrected. Black spray paint was used to cover each mile marker. The original numbers underneath, however, are still visible if you look closely. They resemble ghost impressions. And the trees came next. Branches were hanging low as they pushed in from the sides, getting closer to the road. As we went by, they were so low that they touched the roof. We all realized at one point that the air within the car felt thicker, heavier in some way. The cabin's pressure changed, but the windows remained open. It was palpable in your chest. Around 3 in the morning, the automobile began to make a gentle clicking noise. The tires caused it to accelerate and decelerate. To investigate, Marcus pulled over onto the shoulder. The silence struck us as soon as we were outside. There were no insects or winds, only the sound of our own breathing and the engine cooling. Looking back down the road, I turned. Though they were closer this time, it was possible to make out the outline of those headlights. Or, perhaps more accurately, close enough to notice that there wasn't one. No car was there. There were only 2 lights hanging over the road, spaced appropriately apart, but there is no grille, no outline, no metal, nothing. With a grasp on my arm, Lena declared, "We're getting back in the car." We did not quarrel. Not even the tires were checked by Marcus. He simply drove more quickly than we probably ought to have, and I kept looking in the mirror for the first few minutes. Then the lights abruptly went out. Just gone. No fade, no turn. Instead of being a relief, it made the car's silence feel heavier and worse. We continued to drive without conversing or playing music. The symptoms were even more bizarre at that point. Instead of mentioning towns, they now only included meaningless numbers or directions. Without context, take Route 0 or exit 13A. Return was written on one sign. It was all illogical. Lena snuggled herself into the seat, pulled her hoodie over her head, and clutched the small silver cross she wore every day. She spoke something in a whisper, but I couldn't hear it. The trees continued to enclose. The car's side was scratched by branches. The route became narrower, less like a highway and more like a path. It seemed as though the world was closing in on us and everything was pressing in. Then Lena shouted, She gestured directly ahead, and there it was, a genuine sign. An immaculate green I-75 interstate marker pointing in the direction of Lexington, as clear as day. Marcus didn't think twice. As if it were our final opportunity, he jumped on the ramp. Once more, the road grew wider. The lines returned. The trees moved aside. Suddenly, the GPS returned to the internet. Just a serene little blue arrow on a typical road. No mistakes, no hiccups. The map made sense. We had returned. For the following 2 hours, no one spoke. We arrived home just after dawn. Listed, didn't even bid farewell. For the remainder of the day, just each went inside and slept. Marcus didn't text me about the gas until the following afternoon. Before we left the concert, he had filled up the tank. We ought to have had plenty to go home. However, the tank was nearly empty when we returned. According to the GPS, we covered roughly 20 meters in that time. The section with the disappearing lights and the incorrect signs. However, we managed to burn through more than half of the petrol tank. Nothing lined up when we later attempted to retrace the journey. There is no petrol station on the curve in the road, no gravel path, and none of the towns. We seem to have never been there. I've taken numerous road trips since then, traveling through several states and routes. However, I don't go if the walk passes close to Kentucky's back roads after dark. Narrative 10. At the time, I was 19. I was traveling with 2 friends through Kentucky on our way to my cousin's house, which is located just outside of Clarksville, Tennessee. It was one of those last-minute road excursions that we planned. We didn't make many plans. We simply loaded up the car with gas, packed a cooler full of inexpensive snacks, and threw in a couple duffel bags filled with any clothing we would need. We decided to stay with family for a few days and return before Monday. Nothing difficult. When you hit 55 too quickly, the ancient blue sedan I was driving rocked. Despite having a broken AAC and a single speaker that only worked when you slammed the door twice, it was sufficient to get us where we wanted to go. Early that morning, still wiping sleep off our eyes and clinging to gas station coffee like medicine, we left Cincinnati. At first, the highway was silent, consisting only of long, deserted sections with farms on either side and the occasional billboard inviting us to stop for fried pies or buy fireworks. Every few miles, we tried to determine what kind of roadkill we were witnessing, blasted loud music, and made stupid comments. The entire day seemed effortless, even cozy. We were somewhere outside of Louisville by the end of the afternoon. On the map, I noticed a smaller highway that appeared to be a cleaner path cutting diagonally south, away from the clogged interstate. As the traffic was getting heavier, quicker, and less bothersome, why not, I reasoned, peeled off the main road and followed the turn, which was expected to save the trip time by at least half an hour. It was ideal for a time. Everywhere you looked was open countryside. Here and there were heavy forest patches, and the road itself rose and dipped softly, as if it were designed to put you on autopilot. Nothing but pavement in the sky. No advertising, no signs for fast food or rest areas. However, after an hour or so, I became aware of how few, if any, other cars we were seeing. As we continued, I became increasingly aware that it had been at least 20 minutes since we had passed another car. At first, it was subtle. Nobody spoke. As we waited for the next town to arrive, we all sat there sort of staring out the windows. We finally came to a gas station. A lone structure with 2 rusting pumps and a faded canopy. The sort of business where the prices were still stuck on with masking tape on the vending machine. We reasoned that if it wasn't too scary, we might as well fill up, get some beverages, and maybe use the restroom. It was really silent inside. Behind the counter was a middle-aged man wearing a hat without a logo and a blank name tag. When I walked in, he didn't look up, didn't say anything when I took a seat. A pack of gum and a bottle of soda. Simply rang it up, gave me my change, and looked away as if I hadn't been there. There was no music or sound at all. With a murmured, "Thank you," I withdrew. Derek was outside, pacing the perimeter of the lot as if he needed to shake something off or stretch his legs. Haley continued to browse through her phone in the car, although she briefly glanced up to mouth, "Isn't that creepy?" I took a short look at the car. The tires were in good condition, no leaks, Everything appeared to be typical. We resumed our journey. I first heard it less than 5 minutes later. There was a thin metallic scratching noise emanating from beneath the vehicle. It sounded more like something dragging or brushing than anything loud. It began softly and, after a minute or two, went completely out. I figured we might have run over something foolish in the parking lot or picked up a loose branch. Didn't give it much thought. Haley abruptly leaned forward as we were still giggling over something stupid Derek had said. "Hey," she said, "didn't we miss that turn?" I looked at the GPS. The road signs no longer matched, but it still indicated that we were on the correct roadway. We were receiving exits for towns we had never heard of, rather than names we knew. Banners Crossing, Raven Ridge, and Ash Hollow. They didn't sound authentic at all. The road also appeared to be incorrect. In a way that seemed almost cunning, the ground had transformed. Suddenly, the flat terrain gave way to undulating hills, steep cliffs, and convoluted bends. It was enough to cause us to pause and wonder, wait, are we still in Kentucky? Even though we weren't climbing mountains or anything. Kentucky didn't feel like it. Not this section. I stopped to look at our phones. Things escalated from strange to truly unnerving at that point. We were just outside of Lexington, according to my phone. We were close to Bowling Green thanks to Derek's phone. Haley said that we were near Ashland. That's 3 distinct regions of the state, not close to one another. All of us reloaded our apps, shut them down, and then opened them again. Even switched to airplane mode. The same thing each time. 3 locations, 3 phones. Who knew which one, if any, was correct? An automobile pulled up behind us as we stood there looking at our screens. Slow, then slowly getting closer. The white automobile was ancient enough to have been built in the 90s, if not before. Both sides have dent marks, as if someone had scratched a concrete barrier or mailbox and never bothered to polish it out. The car's speed decreased. It seemed to be assessing us as it rolled by. Only one man, with pale skin and gray hair, was inside, both hands on the wheel. He drove by us like we were trees on the side of the road without even glancing at us. The scratching sound returned as soon as he passed. The same as previously, but more steady and louder. I looked below the automobile once more. There was nothing loose. The sound persisted even though nothing was dragging. We climbed back in and continued on our way. Only now did the road feel as though it was trapped and wouldn't let us go. The scene began to recur. 3 times we went by a crooked wooden fence on a small curve. The same cracked area of asphalt, the same splintered tree. We didn't seem to be repeating ourselves. The world beyond the windows was simply looping, but our direction and speed remained constant. Nothing. No houses, no towns, no signs. An hour or so later, the sun began to set, and the light began to appear strangely stretched, as if it were pulling its heels behind the clouds. After a while, Haley stated, "We need to turn around." I also refrained from arguing. At the next clearing, I made a U-turn and headed back the way we had come. We passed that same petrol station once more around 20 minutes later. The dirty glass, the dented pump, the crooked sign, and oddly, the man behind the counter, who seemed to have remained still since our departure. We all remained silent. We simply continued to drive. The white vehicle reappeared just as we were about to pass it. It appeared to have been waiting for us as it pulled onto the road from a tiny way ahead of us this time. The license plate is empty and has the same scratches. It maintained a constant distance ahead of us. It slowed if I slowed down. It also sped up if I did. Never close enough to capture, but always close enough to see. Once more, there were no tail lights, life indicators, motion, or head turns. Just that gay-haired man gazing straight ahead as though he knew the route better than we ever would. The sound of scraping became intolerable. It hummed through the floor and rocked the dashboard. "It's not real," Haley whispered, covering her ears. "It isn't authentic. It's not real." As if that would put an end to it. Derek lunged forward and grabbed my seat's headrest so firmly that his knuckles turned white. I had the impression that the automobile would stop if I pulled over. After that, something would occur, something for which we were unprepared. A tiny, cracked exit ramp suddenly popped up ahead. No signs, no lighting, no justification. It appeared to be partially deserted. It's the type of path you would only follow if you were totally lost or had no other options. Both of us were. I accepted it. There was no follow from the white sedan. It continued. No change in speed, no turn signal. It simply vanished into the woods. For a while, we bounced over uneven pavement as we followed the exit downhill until the road straightened out and joined another highway. The signs appeared correct this time. The GPS fixed itself. Once more, everything on the map aligned up. We had finally returned to our proper location. For the remainder of the drive, we didn't talk. Nothing. A few hours later, we arrived in Tennessee, drew up to my cousin's house, and quietly unloaded. We didn't discuss it again after that. Nobody mentioned it again.